Formula Circus is a racing game that was developed by Nihon Busan, which was released for the PlayStation in Japan in 1997, and this version of the game would be a re-envisioning of an earlier game that originally saw a release on the PC Engine way back in the early 90s, with the game primarily covering many aspects of Formula 1 style racing. If you've ever played any of the Formula 1 racing games on the PlayStation, this is the equivalent of that, but this game doesn't have the same level of elements and modes in it compared to the more mainstream or fully licensed Formula 1 games that were seen at the time on the console. This game is more of an arcade focused style game, and the Formula 1 cars that are available in it aren't considered as the modern day versions. They're more equivalent to earlier racing cars that would have been seen, say, in the late 70s and early 80s, with bigger engines and more noisier kind of sound aesthetics and so forth. This game as well was also created by developers that had done a number of different racing games that also would have been released on the PlayStation in Japan only. I have covered that in a number of videos on the channel. I'll make sure to leave a link to the playlist of those videos in the description. So where does this game stack up with all of the other types of games similar to it on the PlayStation itself? Well, considering this game came out in 1997, the graphics and the look and feel of the game ideally look more like an earlier PlayStation game, like as if it was out within the first few months of the PlayStation's release, as the graphics are quite basic in terms of what is on offer. But at the same time, this game did proceed to acquire quite a big following in Japan itself, and mainly due to the popularity of the original game that would have been seen on the PC Engine way back a few years prior. So you do have a number of different tracks that you can race on with different opponents to race against, and you do have quick race modes and a championship to race in, which again you can unlock different elements as you play. But in saying that, if you compare it to the more mainstream Formula 1 games from the likes of Psygnosis, this game definitely fails to match up to those type of games in terms of its playability, because while the Formula 1 games had many more elements, one of the good aspects about those games, especially for earlier PS1 racing games, was the handling physics, as they were among some of the best seen on the PlayStation at that time and was very authentic. Formula Circus, however, has a more of an arcade approach, and more so the fact that you're racing with older style of Formula 1 cars. The handling physics and the overall attributes wouldn't have been as well refined compared to the more modern equivalents that would have been seen at that time, as there were a lot more safety features added into more modern cars, whereas older cars, they were just brute force animals, if you will, in terms of the power outputs. There really was no health and safety as such in racing tournaments and events back in those days. So that's what this game is pretty much modelled off of, very early kind of like 1970s, early 1980s racing tournaments and so forth. But for what it does offer a unique kind of look into Formula 1 racing from a different perspective, even from an older generation. But it plays and feels more like an arcade game. It does take a while to get used to, however, because the controls can be quite twitchy and fiddly, almost sluggish at times, and it definitely takes a lot of practice. Your first few attempts at the game, you will struggle to gain any decent positions in each of the races, but give it time. It is one of those games, even I found for myself personally, even with playing the game for the first time, my first few races I had terrible attempts at it, but the more I sat down and played it, I started to get familiar with the handling physics and dynamics. And with regards to the vehicles you can choose, they all have their own unique characteristics. Some cars are faster than others, while others may be slower but will handle that little bit better and have more grip. Very typical of arcade racing games that would have been seen at the time. If you look at the likes of the early Ridge Racer games and all those type of equivalent arcade racers, they all had those unique aspects about them, where cars had different dynamics, and you could pick a car that was suited to your playstyle. If you were just a casual player, you could pick the car that had the easiest to use attributes, like with the grip and the better handling. But if you were more of a seasoned player, or you were more of a daredevil, you could use the cars that had less physics so you could have more of an adrenaline rush as such when you're playing. So it really just depends on your own play style. Like, there is plenty on offer here, even though there's not a lot in terms of overall tracks, but you do have various different attributes with the races themselves, with the car choices, and even being able to choose the different mechanical aspects so that you can alter the downforce and various tweaks and features of each car that can possibly give you an advantage or could create a disadvantage for you depending on the choices that you make. But considering it's still an early enough game, it is a solid racer. Now mind you, it will test you. It's not an easy game to pick up and play. Like I said, many of these games that would have been released in Japan on the PlayStation were quite difficult to master. They weren't the easiest to get into at first. Many of these type of games you had to give it time, because there was a lot of elements that would frustrate players, and there was a lot of kind of like noticeable elements or glitches, if you will, that could hamper your experience. But only with a bit of patience and persistence would you really be able to take advantage of each situation. And in fairness, the PlayStation is home to a multitude of different racing games, and funnily enough, there was a plethora of different Formula 1 style racing games. And even for me personally, only in recent times I've started to see and notice and even witness more of these type of games that I never even knew existed. So that alone is worthwhile checking out, just to experience them at least, as there are a lot of hidden gems on the system that is still yet to be explored, and many of you out there, like myself, still don't know that a lot of these games even exist, or that are even available to play today. So now is a good time to go and check them out while they're there, to see what you think for yourself. Yes, they may not be for everybody, but they will appeal to a select few. But it is what you make of it at the end of the day. So all in all, it's an adequate racer that will appeal to a select few audiences. But if you're a fan of Formula 1 games, you can add this to your list to check out and see what you think for yourself. It does have enough unique appeal and charm to it that would be worth a try at least. Mind you, it will be tough. I'm just going to get that out of the way. But it's up to you. And I would love to know your thoughts of Formula Circus for the PlayStation, if you have even seen or witnessed this game at all, and what do you think about it overall. Are you a fan of this type of game, or even Formula 1 style games that were released on the system, and what do you think of it overall? So be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other types of racing games similar to this that were also released on the PlayStation, then make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to be updated of future videos. And feel free to check out many of the other videos on the channel where I do cover a lot of content around other types of racing games also released on the system, and you can check that out on the playlist below. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.